Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I am suspending the Surrey Police Board and putting in place an administrator.
BC Solicitor General says Surrey's transition to a city police force is not far enough along. Now a former Abbotsford police chief will oversee it. Plus,
when you're preying on people who are really uprooting themselves, that is incredibly unfortunate.
Pinched by high costs and few choices, how do you avoid rental scams? And
we're putting hydrogen, one of our best solutions for reducing emissions from commercial transportation, in the driver's seat.
The BC government is betting big on hydrogen. Will it work?
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Surrey has endured a bumpy transition from the RCMP to a city police force, and now there is another curve. The province has suspended the entire police board and appointed an administrator. Solicitor General Mike Farnworth claims the city of Surrey is dragging its feet on the transition from the Mounties to the Surrey Police Service. Mayor Brenda Locke campaigned on stopping that move during the last civic election. Farnworth then ordered and legislated it to continue. And today, he suspended the force's civilian oversight body and replaced it with former Abbotsford Police Chief Mike Surr.
The mayor has her views on this transition, and I've made it clear that the transition will continue. There are some outstanding issues that I'm particularly concerned about. For example, budgeting for this year and for the coming year.
Farnworth says the suspension is temporary and the board will be reinstated. Mayor Locke says the change completely removes civilian oversight and she will continue to fight the transition. Surrey Police Chief Norm Lipinski says he looks forward to working with Surrey. The Surrey Police Union thanked the board for its work, but says the time has come for the policing transition to be sped up. The provincial government is making a big investment on the most abundant element in our universe. Hydrogen will fuel 6 new commercial trucks in BC in a move to slash emissions in the transportation sector. But as Michelle Gassoub reports, some are not embracing the hopes for hydrogen.
The province is banking big on hydrogen.
We're putting hydrogen, one of our best solutions for reducing emissions from commercial transportation, in the driver's seat.
And spending $16 million on 6 hydrogen fuel cell trucks like this one. The plan? Produce hydrogen at an H-Tech production facility in Burnaby, then transport it through Power Cube trailers to a dedicated hydrogen fueling station in Tsawwassen.
We are looking at bringing hydrogen to market in the next 2 years, which is really, again, a pretty short time if you really think about a 120-something-year-old industry, to do a complete step change in that short a time.
The province says a shift to hydrogen trucks will help BC reach net zero. BC's transport sector is currently responsible for around 25% of provincial emissions, but the challenges of scaling up will be big.
You could expect that a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle is roughly 3 to 4 times the cost of a diesel vehicle.
BC has centered itself as a leader in hydrogen technology. In 2021, it became the first province to introduce a dedicated hydrogen strategy. Isolating hydrogen takes a lot of energy. Green hydrogen is produced from renewable sources, blue from non-renewable sources, and gray from fossil fuel sources. That hydrogen does not have low carbon intensity.
I view this as more of an economic development announcement program rather than something that's going to have meaningful impacts on climate change.
Brower says every move to cut emissions is needed, but not all projects have worked. BC previously invested in 20 hydrogen buses in Whistler for the Olympics. They were eventually sold.
I'm quite skeptical that even in the next 20 years or so, where things are going to take off. And at the same time, we don't have a lot of time, and there's lots of things that are really less innovative, just stopping waste, stopping inefficiencies.
There are currently 5 hydrogen fueling stations in BC, 3 in the Lower Mainland, 1 on Vancouver Island, and 1 in Kelowna. More will be needed to bring hydrogen-fueled trucks to BC roads. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Still with transportation, TransLink and the Mayor's Council on Regional Transportation has made the latest step in the Access for Everyone plan.
Through this plan, we're seeking funding to add up to 9 new BRT routes throughout the region, and today we're excited to have identified the first 3 to move forward.
These 3 corridors will be Metro Vancouver's first bus rapid transit routes. They will run along King George Boulevard, from Langley Township to Haney Place, and from Metrotown at Burnaby to the North Shore. The Mayor's Council says those locations were chosen based on ridership potential and future housing growth. It aims to create 9 routes over the next decade. Should one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Vancouver become more open? As we told you yesterday, Vancouver Council has said no to a motion meant to boost density in Shaughnessy. Justin McElroy looks at the arguments they made against it and why they didn't sit well with some.
Can you make changes to a wealthy neighborhood without causing tension? This week, Vancouver Council voted against a motion that asked staff to come up with a plan to increase density and retail services to Shaughnessy. Now, councillors from the ruling ABC party argued that the motion was redundant because of work happening at a local and provincial level to add density throughout the city, not just Shaughnessy. But they also said this.
I think the motion is actually divisive. I think it's a purely political, purely divisive.
I have to wonder, is this just purely to divide the city?
It feels like it's an effort to try and make this more of a way to divide the city.
But politics is often divisive. Housing in Vancouver is especially divisive. And Shaughnessy is a neighborhood with its own special zoning code. In other words, it would be hard to propose any changes to Shaughnessy that wouldn't be divisive. Now, to be fair to councillors, staff are working on a lot of citywide initiatives that could include Shaughnessy. And they did tell councillors that their plate is already pretty full. But then, council immediately added 2 more things to that plate. One motion to study more density close to schools, and one motion to study how the city can directly create middle-income housing. Of course, those motions came from the governing ABC party, while the Shaughnessy motion came from opposition councillor Christine Boyle. Now, you could say pointing that fact out is divisive, or just politics 101. Justin McElroy, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC's seniors advocate says the province has to do better at supporting older adults at home to keep them out of long-term care homes. Isabel McKenzie's office surveyed thousands of seniors in long-term care facilities and found 40% of them say they didn't want to live there. And more than 60% of care residents said they had no home support before they moved in. McKenzie says the province needs to remove barriers that stop seniors from getting home supports and ensure care homes are the last resort. The BC government does plan to close one of its last youth custody centres next year. Operating the Prince George Centre costs about $5 million a year. The province says it will reinvest money from the closure into community programs, including intensive supervision and restorative justice. The Minister of Children and Family Development says fewer young people have been taken into custody in recent years.
That reduction of youth in the custody centre really accelerated following some changes to the Federal Act in 2019. And we know that that leads to better outcomes for them as well. So we've been investing in community-based services and supporting youth in staying connected to their community rather than coming into custody.
The government plans to relocate all young offenders to the other facility in Burnaby by the end of next March. BC's Labour Minister has announced new policy changes for gig workers like Uber or DoorDash delivery drivers, promising more protections.
First, we will establish a minimum earning standards that equals to 120% of BC general minimum wage, in addition to tips, to be applied to the time that the workers are engaged.
Now, with minimum wage in BC at $16.75 an hour, that's about $20 an hour during the time drivers are actively working. The proposal also stops companies from withholding tips, adds transparency around earnings, provides review processes if driver accounts are suspended, as well as WorkSafe coverage. Our Leanne Young was at today's announcement and spoke with 2 workers who've been pushing for reforms.
I'm not positive. Like, after 2 years, still they don't even understand. This is a professional job, what we are doing, spending like this much time on the apps. I have to take care of my parents. I can't even spend 2 hours like in a week with my father. If you're doing a professional job, what would be your minimum like standard salary? at least we get like $30 to $35 total. Then we can deduct like all the expenses, all the things.
Yeah, so what were you going to show me?
Yeah, I want to show you one thing. This is my total income for 4 days. 379 total income.
When the legislation, if it passes as it stands, it would about double.
That's what I'm expecting. Even the thing is, we are living in the most expensive city. Can we survive like this?
Right. So even if it doubles, you don't think that it would be enough. Yeah. So Indiraj, I wanted to hear from you as well. So, what was your reaction? Did you know about some of the details that were about the changes that were coming ahead of this?
No, I did not.
Okay. So the 120%, so that means about $20 minimum wage. What did you think of that?
I think that's a start. It's definitely not that's going to bring us at par with our even costs of operation in general. I mean, Kuljit is right, like having around a $35 hourly rate, which is, again, there's definitions, you've got engaged time, non-engaged time and whatever, those need to be clarified, but that will at least start giving us a little bit in our pocket. And when Kuljit was mentioning about benefits and dental expenses and whatnot, so that's, I feel, well, a little too further ahead in terms of we just want the basic stuff like, what if my car gets broken down? I'm not being paid at all. What if I have, a doctor's appointment someday? I'm not being paid. So sick pay, vacation pay, we're entitled, we work 7 days, at least 10 to 12 hours. So, right? So we need to have a break for everyone's safety, in fact. So that's why I was nodding to what you were saying.
The CBC's Leanne Young reporting. Now, the province says it will be looking at overtime, statutory and sick pay in the future. It expects the new legislation to be implemented early next year. Food delivery company DoorDash says it agrees with most of the government's proposed changes, but says it thinks the 120% minimum earning standard is too high.
This could definitely have an impact on, the cost for delivery for consumers, resulting in less opportunities and less revenue for restaurants across the province of British Columbia.
DoorDash claims the province's changes could unintentionally lead to fewer orders for drivers. It is no secret that parts of BC's rental market are very challenging, making it tough to find a place that checks all of somebody's boxes. Now, with rising desperation, though, comes a rise in scamming. Our Maurice Katz spoke with an expert about those most vulnerable and how you can avoid a trap.
If you're looking at a rental posting like this that's way under market, you're probably looking at a rental scam. We know that the cost of rents in BC are at the highest they've ever been, with one bedrooms going for over $3,000 a month, which makes rental scams like these feel way worse. And when speaking to the experts, that housing crisis, that rental crisis, is what's making rental scams that much more prevalent and predatory.
Rental scams are definitely, they are almost affecting the most vulnerable. Someone who's looking for a new home. Rental properties are, hard to come by, especially ones that fit your budget and what your needs might be. And the reality is that this is a big ticket item. We look at the median dollar loss, which is kind of that midpoint. It was $1,600 in 2022. That's a lot of money for most people, especially those who are either going to a new location or, maybe traveling for school even. When you're preying on people who are really uprooting themselves, that is incredibly unfortunate.
So are rental scams actually more common?
It is on the rise across the nation. And there is a housing market crunch across the nation, right? Especially in the metros. And we need to be mindful that as people move, especially if they're moving from a different province to another location, they're not always there in person, and that creates a lot of opening and gaps for scammers to come in.
Can you tell us an example of a rental scam?
We recently saw a consumer who was moving from another province, and so they were coming from Alberta, they were coming to Vancouver, and they were looking for new space for themselves, their partner, and their dog. And they thought they had found it, right? So they had a conversation with the suspected property manager. They saw pictures. They did a bit of Google searching themselves. I mean, they did a little bit of due diligence. They looked up the photos, and the photos matched the property address. And so they thought, this seems great. The suspected property manager even offered to pick them up from the airport. So they sent over what seemed normal, right? First month's rent, security deposit, pet deposit, and thought everything was great. As they got closer to the time and they were trying to arrange that pickup or, get more information, they lost contact. So they weren't picking up, they weren't responding, and all of a sudden they realized they'd been duped. So this is really that stereotypical example of you have to see what you're purchasing. You really want to do your due diligence to the next level. And there were a number of red flags within this story that are hidden in plain sight.
Let's talk about some of those red flags. How can we avoid them?
If you do a reverse image search and you look at these images, are they popping up in more than one location? That's a red flag. In this last story, they were using a personal email. So they sent their security deposit to a personal email. That's a red flag. If they're working for a formal company, they're going to have a legitimate email address that goes back to that website. On the contract, they had a GST number. Again, seems legitimate. But if you go to the Government of Canada website and you review that GST number, it's actually no longer active. It's not for that company. And so you really want to do an extreme level of due diligence. But the thing here that is number one and paramount is you have to send someone to see a space in person. So if you can't, come into town by yourself, send a trusted friend, a family member, a colleague, anyone that you trust to go see the space and have that conversation face to face so that the person you're dealing with is legitimate and the space is legitimate.
If you've ever been affected by a rental scam, you can go to the Better Business Bureau's Scam Tracker tool. Maurice Katz, CBC News, Vancouver.
Darius Madavi joins us with a first look at the weather, and you have a warning to tell us about.
Yes, that's right. So on the north coast, especially the coastal areas, we do have a rainfall warning in place. The south still looking very calm today. It's really up here that we have our active weather today and into the weekend, actually. So by Saturday morning, we're expecting to see around 40 to 70 millimeters for more inland parts of the north coast up by Stewart. Meanwhile, over by Prince Rupert, we're expecting up to 150 millimeters. Today, we've already seen over 60 millimeters of rainfall there. I do want to briefly look at the radar, not because we're going to see anything, but because we're not seeing anything. I want to remind people that we don't have radar coverage up north. So whenever we do look at this map, if you don't see anything up here, it's not because nothing's happening. It's just because we can't see it on the radar. So instead, we have to rely on the station's reports and our model data and then sort of compare those to make sure that it is accurate. In this case, it has been. We have seen some incredible rainfall streaming in up here. If we play this forward, you can see Friday morning we have a brief break in the rain, but then it does return and continue right into Saturday morning. This is the point where we think we're going to see around 150 millimeters of rain. I do also want to add that we have seen the models shift somewhat. So now, like yesterday, we said the models weren't in agreement. The ones that said later have won out, it seems, because it's the west coast of the island getting that rain by around noon and then coming to the lower mainland later Saturday and not lasting too long before we clear up again, more than likely for Saturday by noon, or Sunday by noon, sorry.
Very good. Thanks very much, Darius. We'll check in later.
Thank you.
To the Middle East now, Israel continues its military operations in Gaza's north, including at its largest hospital, Al-Shifa. Israel's military showed what it said were Hamas weapons and equipment, but no images yet of the extensive command center it claims Hamas operated there. And while Israel is warning people in Gaza south to leave, as Barry Stewart shows us, many civilians already displaced from the north fear they have nowhere else left to run.
As we can see, we are in the heart of the hospital.
Israel's military released video of what it says soldiers found at Al-Shifa. Proof, they say, that underneath the hospital was a Hamas command center. They claim they discovered a vehicle filled with weapons and ammunition, and they released new images which they say show a tunnel at Al-Shifa and another Gaza hospital. Another discovery, says the IDF, the body of Yehudit Weiss, a 64-year-old cancer patient, one of the roughly 240 people taken hostage on October 7th. Israel described its operation at Al-Shifa as precise and targeted, while the Hamas-run health ministry accused them of ransacking the hospital and questioning patients, medical staff, and those sheltering there. CBC News wasn't able to reach any of the doctors at the hospital because of a communications blackout.
No fuel, no bakery, no fuel, no hospital, no fuel, no water, and here, no fuel, no communication.
Israel started letting some fuel into Gaza for the first time, but the UN says it's not enough amid a rapidly worsening humanitarian crisis. There's not enough food or clean water. Most of the hospitals have stopped functioning, and the ones that are still operating are overwhelmed. Hundreds of thousands have fled their homes in the north, now staying in crowded apartments and tents in the south. But Israel's military has warned those living in 4 towns in the south to seek shelter somewhere else. They asked us to go to the south. Now they're asking us to leave. Where do we go, says this man. The region is in such chaos that Gaza officials haven't been able to update the number of how many have been killed, which stands at more than 11,000. And international concern is growing.
We are in active conversations with the government of Israel about ensuring that civilians can be safe from harm.
Israel says it targeted senior Hamas leaders hiding underground. But in Israel, hundreds of families of hostages are holding protests, fearing the government is putting their loved ones at risk.
We demand our government to do more, to make a deal to include all the hostages in any price.
The march will end in Jerusalem on Saturday in front of the Prime Minister's house, where they will demand the government make a deal with the militants it's at war with.
Briar Stewart reporting. Now, against the backdrop of war, a joyful reunion in Vancouver tonight as a father's desperate bid to get his 2 kids safely out of Gaza finally succeeded after years and continents apart. Yvette Bren was there to see the emotional moment they were reunited.
For Mohammed Fayad, it's been a month of agony with his kids trapped in Gaza. Moments before finally seeing them, his emotions are overwhelming.
I will be so happy. There's no word to describe how will be my feeling, yeah.
They're safe in Canada.
This is my son, my daughter.
Almost 2 years ago, Fayad arrived here as a refugee. Since then, he's been working to bring his kids over too. They've been living with family in Gaza. When the war broke out after October the 7th, his mission became frantic.
I am very concerned about their safety. And I am very worried and fear that I'm going to lose them at any moment.
Last week, the news he'd been waiting for.
I received a call from my daughter to say, no, now we are safe, we are in Egypt, and Canadian Embassy take care of us. And that time I feel like, oh my God, I start crying.
The kids had crossed safely through the Rafah border checkpoint with a group of Canadians. 14-year-old daughter Qamar spoke to CBC News in Cairo. She says she's fine now because she's in a safe place, but not fine because she left her people behind. Back in Canada, Fayad could only wait until today. After the joy of this reunion, the challenge of adjusting to a new life outside the war zone.
These children have both witnessed and experienced trauma, starting from whatever may have happened in their family of origin, with their separation from their father, as well as everything that they've been exposed to most recently.
All right, guys, thank you so much.
But for now, their father is happy to dream of a new life and new roots. Yvette Brand, CBC News, Vancouver.
On Tuesday, tens of thousands of people gathered in Washington, D.C. in support of Israel after the Hamas attacks of October 7th. Among the many is Rabbi Jonathan Infeld. He is rabbi at the Congregation Beth Israel here in Vancouver, back from that very large gathering. Thanks for joining us, Rabbi. First of all, what motivated you to go to Washington, D.C.?
So, first of all, thank you. Thank you, Dan, for having me on the program this evening. I really greatly appreciate it. It was so important for me to travel to Washington, D.C., to be there for the rally. You know, the reality actually is that there were 290,000 people who showed up. It was an incredible experience, and it was so important to be there.
What was the general mood? Sorry, I was...
No, please. The mood was actually very positive, despite the fact that this is a very dark time. A dark time for the world and for Israel and for the Jewish people. We as a Jewish people have faced unprecedented anti-Semitism, even here in Canada and even in Vancouver. We have seen a rise of anti-Semitism across Canadian campuses, and I know that my own congregants and members of the Vancouver Jewish community have felt anti-Semitism and actually have felt alone. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the reasons that I wanted to be at this event.
we have seen a documented rise in anti-Semitism. We've also seen a documented rise in Islamophobia. As a faith leader, what do you tell your congregants, and whether they be and others that you've spoken with, whether they be Jewish or Muslim or Palestinian? What do you say to them?
Of course, you know what? I believe that all of us as Canadians must stand up against hate, no matter what kind of hate it is, whether if it's Islamophobia or if it's anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter. We must stand against hate. But at this moment, especially for the Jewish community, it's been exceptionally difficult. 2 synagogues in Montreal had attempted fire bombings. 2 Jewish day schools were shot at. And just last week, my son actually was at Concordia University, where he works for the Jewish community, and was actually attacked by an anti-Semitic mob. He came within centimeters of being physically assaulted. And so I have to say, I actually saw my son at the rally. He came down from Montreal, and I don't think I've ever given him a bigger hug and bigger kiss, because this was so meaningful to be there and to be able to see him and to be able to fight against anti-Semitism and to be able to fight against hatred of all kinds. It's so important at this moment.
And lastly, we appreciate your time. We have heard louder calls for a ceasefire. There was another protest in Washington in mid-October. Burnaby Councillor Daniel Tétrault, as well as Burnaby Council, unanimously calling for a ceasefire. What do you make of those calls?
Certainly, as a rabbi and members of the Jewish community, we care deeply for peace. We care deeply for children, Jewish and Palestinian children, and it is our prayer that sometime soon there will be peace. But the one thing we know is that a ceasefire at this moment will actually probably bring about war and violence in the future. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And if Hamas has a ceasefire at this moment, they will use this as an opportunity to regroup and attack again.
You don't see it, if I could ask, you don't see a window of time in there in which, if a ceasefire or some sort of, as they call it, humanitarian pause was offered, that a quelling of the violence could occur?
So a humanitarian pause, I understand. There was a ceasefire on October 6th. That ceasefire was not brought to an end by Israel, but it was brought to an end by Hamas. Unfortunately, we know that a ceasefire will end, and it will end because of Hamas. And it will end when Hamas attacks Israel again. So as much as I'd like to see a ceasefire, I know that a ceasefire at this moment is nothing but an invitation to violence and death on both sides at some point in the future.
Rabbi Jonathan Infeld, we appreciate your time and your perspective. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
What was it like to be a woman working in policing decades ago? We'll show you a story from our archives and hear from a Vancouver Police Deputy Chief on her long career. Stick around. And hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. Campus leaders at 2 universities are sounding alarms about food insecurity among post-secondary students. Madeline Smith visited the campuses, and here's what she learned.
A little bit of savings put away already. So that's helped a little bit, but I'm burning through that.
10 years after finishing his first MacEwan program, Matt Krause is back at the university, this time studying to be an accountant. And he says financially, it's a completely different experience.
I think now everything's just kind of risen, 20, 30% in costs. Things like fast food. Students always relied on fast food for being cheap food, meals, but everything is expensive now. So
between grocery inflation, rising rent, and tuition increases, students say they're feeling the pinch. And many are turning to campus support organizations for help.
But it's not enough. We try to do what we can, but we can only do so much. They're looking at, do I buy a textbook or do I get my next meal? Like, there really is decisions like that happening.
Here at MacEwan, the pantry hands out free food hampers to students every 2 weeks. They've had to triple their budget due to rising demand.
It's pretty bad, and a lot of those students are international students, students who don't have the supports that they need.
For students at the University of Alberta, it's the same story. The campus food bank is dealing with their busiest fall ever, and they say that's not sustainable.
Right now, the stockroom is beautiful. It's full of colorful food, but in probably a month, it'll be empty again. We just had our trick-or-treat food drive, which brought in about 5,000 pounds of food, but we're giving out about 5,000 pounds of food per week.
The campus food bank used to rely only on donations. Now, they spend $10,000 every month buying food for students in need. They set a new record in March, helping more than 1,600 students with groceries, and say they're already seeing similar numbers this fall.
5 years ago, we would have never expected to be in a position like this. We were around 200, maybe. That was the top of the number of people that we were serving every month.
Students who use the food bank say they're taking on more debt to meet expenses, and sometimes sacrificing their health.
Foregoing proper meals just to be able to afford your rent, your utilities, your tuition.
Without the food bank, I wouldn't be able to right now pay rent and pay for food. I pay just for regular things.
The campus food bank says it's generally booking up a few weeks in advance and has stepped up fundraising efforts to meet demand. But if this is the new normal, they worry whether they'll be able to keep up. Madeline Smith, CBC News, Edmonton.
It is Throwback Thursday, and we are diving into our vast CBC archives. As of 2020, women make up nearly 30% of the Vancouver Police Department. This story from 1993 reflects on how far women have come along in the force. Have a look.
Anita Jackson is one of only 109 female police officers in Vancouver. That's just under 10% of the force. And yet female police officers have come a long way in the past 20 years. 20 years ago, Jackson never would have been allowed to attend a fight like this. It wasn't until 1974 that women were even allowed to go on patrol.
We're equal. There's situations where I might not feel comfortable to go in, where a man might. If it's dealing with two men, I'll wait till I have backup. Or dealing with a sexual assault of a female. It's easier, I think, for a female to talk to a female in that situation than a man.
Jackson has been on the Vancouver police force for 3 years.
Eyes, fight!
This year, women recruits at the police academy made up more than 50% of the class.
The question, of course, is will they remain in policing? And that's a question I think management now has to look at. Do we lose women more often than we lose men? And if we do, why?
At a conference this week in Vancouver, more than 700 female police officers have gathered to discuss law enforcement. They come from many different backgrounds, and yet they are all part of the first wave of women who are just now rising in the ranks of police work.
When I joined the police force in 1960, at that time, women in the police force and also women in public service had to retire unmarried.
I worked with men and women, and I believe once you respect yourself, you are respected.
Here in Vancouver, it was only recently that a woman was promoted to senior management on the force.
It's happening. Women are rising up in the ranks as a result of the passage of time and them earning their points and getting there. And I like to see that, as opposed to people being placed in positions because we should.
But despite a growing recognition of the need to have women on the police force, they are still not rising as fast or staying as long as men. The problem is not ability, the problem is not prejudice. The problem is balancing the demands of police work against the demands of a family. In many ways, what is happening on the police force to women mirrors what is happening in many demanding professions. For Anita Jackson, it will be an easier struggle because of those who have gone before her, but it will be a struggle nonetheless. Deborah Goebel, CBC News, Vancouver.
Joining us now to talk about that blast from the past is Vancouver Police Deputy Chief Fiona Wilson. She started her career with the VPD in 1999 and yesterday was elected the president of the BC Chiefs of Police, making her the first woman to hold that position. Deputy Chief, congratulations. First of all, let's look at this story. One of the concerns we heard was that retention rates among women in the force was lower than men. Have you seen that change over your career so far?
I have actually. Our retention rates are very, very high at the VPD, both for men and women. It's actually unusual for someone to join the Vancouver Police Department and not complete their entire career there. Of course, it does happen, but our rates of attrition are actually incredibly low.
When it comes to the passage of time, what experiences from 1999, perhaps challenges that you faced in the force, are relatable to what we saw in 1993?
Well, certainly back in 1999, there had been some changes from when Anita Jackson was being interviewed, but there have been significant changes in the 25 years since then, of course. And I think one of the most significant ones is the sheer number of women that we have on the job now. We're close to 30% of our sworn membership are women. And I would say that's the single biggest difference than when I even got on in 1999, when we were at about 13%.
Now, we heard one of the other problems there was the idea of balancing a career in the police force with the demands of a family. We know not everyone has a family or starts one. So how do you think forces have changed over the years to accommodate that?
There's been great recognition over the years that, women often take on a more leading role in the home when it comes to raising children and domestic responsibilities. And so we've done things over the years like allowed for some of our female members and certainly even our male members to job share, for example. So we found that after women were finished with maternity leave, that was a really attractive option for a lot of them, and often just until their children were starting school, for example. But I also think that the division of labor over the years has changed significantly. And, we have male members who are playing a much, much more active role when it comes to raising children and domestic duties. And so I think that's been a significant change for women as well.
Lastly, Deputy, appreciate your time. You were the first woman to hold the position of president of the BC Chiefs of Police. What do you hope to accomplish in that time?
Well, it's such an honor to have been voted into that position just this last couple of days. And there's always a lot of work. I've been in the vice president role for the last year. There's a lot of work with respect to just representing police across the province. Our association represents, over 9,200 members, and including, the RCMP, Statly and tribal police, municipal agencies, transit police, for example. And there's no shortage of work when it comes to advocacy and making sure that we have a seat at the table when it comes to matters that are going to impact our frontline members.
Deputy Chief Fiona Wilson with Vancouver Police Department, thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
It took just 6 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all 4 counts, 4 murders and 1 of attempted murder. A man who attacked a Muslim family on the street in Ontario is going to prison. That story is next.
So I joined the military in 1994. I joined the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. I've got 3 overseas operations, 1st Battalion, all the way. We have 20 tiny homes, approximately 300 square feet. The whole purpose is to give transitional subsidized housing to veterans who need that soft landing and give them a safe, secure, healing environment so that they can carry on with their civilian life. And as you can see, when they come in, it's a nice secure unit. So what we're trying to provide is transitional independent living, where the resident doesn't have to worry about anything. They can cook for themselves, clean for themselves, they have a bed to sleep in. It is so important for veterans to have that, quote, base of operations that they can work out of to help them transitioning into civilian life. Some are on the streets, some are referred to us through Veterans Affairs, Vets Canada, and other organizations, and some just call us up directly. We want to try and get them all the assistance they need so they can carry on with their lives in that 12-month transition. The whole concept is that community living, similar to a barrack block, where you have everybody in their own units, their own rooms. They can live independently, but then they can come and go as they please. If they want to get together, they can go to the resource center and go to and have that Sunday dinner together. It's a general resource center where we can hang out. We have a TV in there, we put on movies, but it gives them that togetherness. Some have jobs, some are still using the Veterans Affairs to assist them, some are going back to school, which is a good thing. We are succeeding, that they come in, they get that soft landing, they get the supports they need, and then they carry on, and they get that little bit of a breather.
A jury has found Nathaniel Veltman guilty in the deadly attack on a Muslim family in London, Ontario, almost 2.5 years ago. That verdict drew emotional reaction inside the courtroom today. And as Chris Ensing reports, many in the community feel the healing may take much longer.
Inside the courtroom, gasps and tears as the jury announced its verdict. Nathaniel Veltman guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. On June 6, 2021, Veltman used his truck to kill 4 members of the Afzal family, murdering 3 generations of the Pakistani Muslim family and seriously injuring a 9-year-old boy. The jury's decision was made after 6 hours of deliberation, reviewing 10 weeks of evidence introduced at trial, including a video confession to officers hours after the attack and pieces of a manifesto written to share his white national beliefs. The Crown said that Veltman did this to send a brutal message to Muslims and to intimidate them. Outside the courthouse, relatives thanked the Crown while asking people to reflect on the night of the attack nearly 2.5 years ago.
This trial forced us to return to that intersection once again. The dreadful crossroads where the very best and worst of humanity converged 2.5 years ago.
You can't deny the feelings of fear that people might experience, but this is an important step towards making our streets safer. And the fear is real. And we have many of our community members who are visibly Muslim, and they continue to express, fears of walking down the street.
Today, the defense said that they will consider all of their options moving forward. We're expecting that a sentencing hearing will take place in December. Veltman will be given life with no chance to apply for parole for 25 years. Chris Ensing, CBC News, Windsor.
This year, Alberta witnessed its worst wildfire season on record. In preparation for next year, the province has now added a new tool to its arsenal. Julia Wong looks at how it works and what it could mean for the future.
It's a new way to attack wildfires from the air. This nighttime firefighting helicopter has different lighting inside and outside of the chopper, so the pilot and crews can wear night vision goggles. That allows teams to better navigate and see active parts of a fire in the dark.
Firefighting at night can be more effective due to lower temperatures, higher humidities. It's something that I think our organization could do better at, so we identified it as kind of something we could work on, and this aircraft is a tool to support not just aerial firefighting at night, but it can help to support ground firefighting like heavy equipment and crews.
Alberta is believed to be the only province in the country with this type of technology right now. The chopper was used several times this past wildfire season to do reconnaissance, go on water bombing runs, and move crews around at night. The province just got out of its worst wildfire season on record. Close to 1,100 wildfires burned more than 2.2 million hectares. Alberta Wildfires says this tool could give it the upper hand with future wildfires. But one expert says while there are advantages to this type of helicopter, it's best used when fire activity is calmer.
With the fires raging through the night, the helicopter won't be very efficient unless it's a small fire.
Flanagan says if the rollout here is successful, it could be a game changer for other fire agencies across the country. Julia Wong, CBC News, Edmonton.
Fire and ice. Concerns mount for people in a small town in Iceland as underground magma bubbles up. More on the threat of a volcanic eruption after the break.
After long thought, we are closing the business effective immediately. We will be posting more details soon regarding paying of accounts and closing sales. Thank you for your support over the years. Thank you.
I think I'm having maybe a little bit harder time with the heritage fifth generation, and we're the ones that lose it. That's been hard to deal with.
Priorities change over the years, so we started to see it, 20 to 30 years ago, that we just weren't getting the same amount of sales. And again, there was more competition because for the first, over 100 years, we were the only game in town. And all of a sudden, everybody is doing something, whether it's out of their own home or the big box stores. So it became a little difficult, as well as through economic times. People don't have the disposable income that they used to, so of course, it's not a priority. Food on the table and a roof over their heads is more important to their families.
You've got to watch your pennies, and it hasn't been easy. A lot of sleepless nights, a lot of tears.
My daughter called me from Alberta, and she saw it on Facebook, and I'm not on Facebook. And so then I called the next day to make sure that they were okay, that nobody had a serious illness or anything like that. And it's regrettable for me. I'm very sorry that I'm not going to be able to get those things that I like, but it's wonderful for them to, after so many years that they've worked so hard.
We love doing flowers for the local people, but probably my favorite is when we got to do flowers for the Queen when she was here, and to see that when she left Moncton several hours later, which is very uncommon, her lady-in-waiting was still carrying the bouquet that we made for the students at Sussex Elementary. That was my proudest moment.
I would definitely say thank you for supporting us all these years, through the thick and thin. It's been our honor to be there for the births, the weddings, the deaths.
Yeah, it's just thank you.
A small fishing town in southwestern Iceland is on high alert. Authorities are monitoring the buildup of magma underneath that community. And as Chris Brown shows us, a series of recent quakes have raised worries about a possible volcanic eruption.
The town of Grindavik is broken and scorched. Enormous fissures have opened up, caused by hundreds of tremors rattling the earth and people's nerves.
There is some volcanic activity going on, very high activity, so we had to take measures and evacuate the whole town.
Authorities have started to reinforce key infrastructure, such as power plants, and there's great uncertainty about when, if ever, almost 4,000 evacuees will be able to move back to their homes.
Yesterday I waited on the other side for 5 hours just to go home to get some stuff.
I don't think we'll ever feel safe after knowing what has happened there.
A large reservoir of magma has spread out roughly 800 meters below the Reykjanes Peninsula. A small finger of lava from the same magma field broke through 3 times in recent years, creating a fiery, popular tourist attraction. And the window for a major eruption could still be several weeks away, says this volcanologist.
In all cases, the earthquake activity declined just before the little dike or little finger of magma made it to the surface. So I don't think we should say now it's not going to happen.
Iceland was created by volcanoes, and people have always lived with them. But this area had been eruption-free for centuries. And what's happened over the last few days has shocked people, says this journalist.
I mean, we have always known that volcanoes can be pretty tricky neighbors. You know, you have to take them into account, but we are just not used to them this close to the most densely populated areas of Iceland.
Icelanders founded Grindavik more than 1,000 years ago, but with the damage that's already been done, residents fear that long history may be at an end. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Volcanoes make difficult neighbors. Darius Madavi joins us with the forecast. Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, that quote stuck out to me too. That was very well put. And it's not just volcanoes. Iceland sits on the boundary of 2 tectonic plates, 2 of the largest tectonic plates. And it makes it very seismically active, which also generates some of that volcanic activity. Now, we had an increase in volcanic activity in this area in the southwest of Iceland over the last month or so, a little bit over a month now. But it was over this past weekend that we saw that activity really pick up. And so we've seen thousands of earthquakes since the weekend. Some, I believe last night there were over 800 earthquakes. And here, if we take a look, this is from over the last month or so. And you can see that line of activity really concentrated around Grindavik. Now, sorry for the quality here, but you can see that fissure, that fault that's lying underneath there. That's where the magma has been bubbling up and, as we heard, is now sitting less than a kilometer from the surface. So very much a precarious situation and difficult to say when exactly we're going to see those impacts and where they will show up, but it's something that we are actively watching. Now, if we turn to BC, we also have a serious situation here. It's not volcanic, but the drought situation does continue. You can see we've had some slight improvement for Haida Gwaii, parts of the north coast, and in the south, in the Similkameen Basin, but we're only seeing a drop of a level or 2. The fact that we are seeing such slow improvement here in the fall is really a good indication of how severe the drought situation has been, because this, given how the cooler temperatures we've been having and how much rain we've been seeing in some places, especially up north, it's been a very slow transition. Now, over the next 48 hours, we do have some more precipitation coming into the province, primarily as snow up in the northwest, but also some incredible rainfall, as we talked about earlier, where we have those rainfall warnings on the north coast. Still expecting considerable rainfall in addition to what we've already seen, those 60 or so millimeters, up to 100 still expected as we get into Saturday. So be on the lookout for that wet weather to continue. Here in the south, we do have warmer temperatures, but a cold front is coming down from the north over the next few days, so temperatures might start to come down a little bit. But if we take a look at our conditions tomorrow, we're not looking too bad. We do have that rain on the coast and sunny, but cloudy partly cloudy conditions here in the south and here in Vancouver. Whoopsie, There we go. That's tonight. We see that cloud build in and then clear in the morning. And here we go. Here's the big picture. Clearing by noon tomorrow, and then we have those evening showers Saturday into Sunday.
Okay, thanks very much, Darius.
Thanks, Dan.
A salmon-armed teenager with a unique passion has stacked up 3 Guinness World Records and has a Christmas movie inspired by his life. You'll want to see this.
Maybe if I spell it out, big boy, you'll take me out proper. You nailed my heart to your wall, but you never dusted off after. Oh, you know you're making me feel. Oh, like what's real ain't real, but it's real to me. Oh, maybe if I'm a broken wing, big boy, you're my nest. You know you nailed my heart to your wall. You disposed of the rest on me. And now we throw, push, and shove. Oh, like what's love ain't love, but it's love to me. Oh, well, my boy is not a man yet. My boy is not a man yet, but boy, do I love it when you kiss my neck. Oh boy, last night was perfect, but now you're changing your mind. Oh, like what's mine ain't mine, but you're mine to be. So maybe if we try again, big boy, we could have it my way. You know you nailed my heart to your wall, but it was damaged anyways. Oh, you know you're making me feel. Oh, like what's real ain't real, but it's real to me. Oh, you're making me feel. Ooh, like what's real ain't real, but it's real to me. Whoa.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. Join us for CBC British Columbia's annual Food Bank Day on December 1st. We're making the season kind with a special day of programming, all in support of local food banks across BC. This year, for the first time ever, you can watch our live stream of the day on CBC Gem and at cbc.ca/foodbankday. We'll see you on December 1st.
A salmon-armed teen who collected 5 Guinness World Records in 3 years has inspired a new Hallmark Christmas movie. The film, called A World Record Christmas, came out today on the W Network.
Charlie here is attempting to break the Guinness World Record for stacking the most Jenga blocks on top of one vertical block.
So I can show the world that autistic people can do great things. And so my dad will be proud of me. Did he leave because I'm autistic? What? I just wanted to be in a book, wasn't in the psychology section.
Charlie, these books are about autism. They are not about you.
A World Record Christmas.
Today also happens to be Guinness World Records Day. Alden Maxwell spoke with On the Coast host Gloria Makarenko about his passion for stacking Jenga blocks.
High. How high is it's almost my height, so like 5'10", 5'11". But the reaction right now is 1,840.
What? 1,840. Yeah. How long does that take?
That takes 2.5 to 3 hours.
And some skill. Thanks for being with us tonight. I'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. See you then.